Wonderful.
Got it. Hi there, I'm Lauren Hepler, Senior Editor of GreenBiz.com. We are here at the Paris Climate Talks, COP21 at the Sustainable Innovation Forum. Joining me now is Anthony Hobley, who is the CEO of Carbon Tracker, think tank you probably know from the world of stranded assets and carbon risks. So I've seen a big number floating around that's $2 trillion. Can you explain to me some of the latest research that you guys are working on this week?
Absolutely. Well, 2.2 trillion. As financial analysts, we like to be accurate about the numbers. Yes, I mean, what we wanted to do was sort of drill in and look at some of the granularity. So we know we need a very aggressive low carbon transition over the next 30 years. And we know we need to move away from oil, gas and coal, particularly coal. Yeah. So we wanted to understand where is it best to focus all of our efforts? Where do the real risk of stranded assets lie? So we decided to buy all the industry data for all of the world's oil, gas and coal projects, and our team of 7 financial analysts have spent the last sort of 7 or 8 months poring over the data and the numbers and doing the analysis to try and find the projects that we do not need in this transition, to effectively separate the ones that we will need and we can use within the 900 gigatons, the so-called carbon budget and the carbon bubble, from all of those oil, gas and coal projects that make neither climate nor financial sense. And we've termed those the projects that fall within the danger zone because they are high risk from both a climate and a financial perspective. And if we can take those projects off the table, some of them, particularly coal projects, are projects in operation, but many of the oil and gas projects are planned projects where the industry wants to pour billions, trillions into developing them, and we don't need them if we're going to stay below 2 degrees. And probably we don't need them because there's clean technology emerging that will provide the energy for us.
And what is the pipeline of projects you were pulling this data from? How did you go about collecting that?
Well, we use industry databases that you can buy commercially. It's the databases which many of the energy companies themselves use and many of the investment banks use. And we use that commercially available data, which is the same data the companies in the financial markets use, and we analyze that. So we're comparing like with like.
Gotcha. And in terms of, you mentioned the carbon bubble, obviously I alluded to stranded assets, or this potential for massive write-downs in terms of carbon assets the companies are holding on to. What will it take to sort of move us into the next phase in that conversation, where maybe you have more investors or more pressure to disclose some of these carbon assets earlier?
Well, if I could first just touch on some of the 3 key findings from the report, and then we can look at what that means for the investors. So what it means is that with coal, we do have a problem. I mean, we really must tackle coal. And it means that there is no financial case whatsoever for any new coal mines or for any new coal basins. It also means quite a lot of the existing coal supply we need to take off the table. And we must ensure that there's not a pickup in demand as China moves away from coal, as it clearly is. There's not a pickup in demand from Southeast Asia and India. Right. So that's critically important. For oil, we probably need most of the existing reserves that are in production now and will last for the next 10 years or so. But what we do not need, we clearly do not need, is for the oil industry to go out and be developing yet more reserves and resources, the Arctic, the tar sands, the ultra deep sea. Right. We need the oil industry to go ex-growth, so that actually it accepts that its years of growth are over, and now it's a yield, what the financial professionals would call a yield stock. So it moves from a growth stock to a yield stock, and that could preserve a lot of value. And that's important because large parts of our respective pensions depend on those companies. So we need to ensure they do not destroy value. Right. For gas, there may be some limited room for growth, but nowhere near as much as the gas industry project would have you believe, and that LNG is particularly risky from a financial perspective. So, and the reason I wanted to run through those points is that this is sort of the language, and these are the sort of financial risks that investors, asset managers, pension funds understand. Right. And it also tells us that there's a fossil fuel, what we call a fossil fuel risk premium, many in the financial markets are only just waking up to. Now, risk is an important consideration when you decide to invest. And generally how you deal with risk, if you decide to go ahead, is you price it into the cost of capital. And the problem is that this risk is not really fully understood, so it's not being priced in. So many fossil fuel projects are benefiting from a lower cost of capital. They're getting money far too cheaply, and they shouldn't be. So part of our mission is to get the financial markets to see that risk, price it in, and ensure the cost of capital for fossil fuels goes up, or even better, they see the risks as far too high. They do not give them or allow them the capital to put into these projects that would take us above 2 degrees.
Right.
And we're getting, I think, more and more traction. If you think about the Paris summit, I think there's many unique things, many stars are aligning, I think, to give us a successful outcome. One thing that struck me is the fact that the governor of one of the major central banks came to Paris, came to a climate summit and made a big announcement. I don't think the governor of a major central bank has ever done that before. That's an important signal. And that's, the fact that Mark Carney, in both his capacity as governor of the Bank of England, but also chair of the Financial Stability Board, is talking about this issue and the fact that it is a risk and that we need to understand it. And as you asked, we need disclosure.
Right.
It is, I think, one of the key tipping points with regards to the financial markets engagement in this issue.
And in terms of what is going on the ground in Paris right now, we've heard a lot of talk at the side events, more in the business sphere, about carbon pricing.
Yes.
And, sort of taking these externalities into account. Are you surprised that we're not hearing more about this from the official realm, or where does this conversation go from here?
I think what's actually been really smart about the preparations for Paris is the recognition of the limitations of international agreements and public international law. Generally, public international law is about recognizing what countries are doing anyway.
Right.
So Christiana and the French have been very smart, I think, in getting the countries to come up with their own commitments and put those on the table in the run-up to Paris. So Paris will be more about providing a framework around what the countries are prepared to do anyway. That's incredibly important. And also, I think, the recognition that you cannot impose a carbon price in some sort of top-down way by waving a sort of magic international wand.
Right.
You need to develop that bottom-up and then link it. But I think the other key difference, if we think back 6 years to Copenhagen and the perception of Copenhagen as a failure, the big difference over the last 6 years is the clean technology has matured dramatically and the costs of that clean technology have dropped dramatically. What I think Carbon Tracker's financial analysis tells us is we're already in that low carbon technology driven transition. The big unknown is, will it happen quickly enough to keep us below 2 degrees? And I think that's where Paris and a carbon price can play an incredibly important part in providing the clear signal to drive that technology transition quickly enough to keep us below the 2 degrees pathway.
And last question, in terms of the commitments we've seen on the business side, and that is companies experimenting with internal carbon pricing, or are there other interesting mechanisms that you're seeing bubbling up in the private sector?
Yes, I think let's just explore that question of carbon pricing. I think it's good that many companies are talking about and implementing an internal carbon price, but quite often, when they talk about an internal carbon price, that's very limited. They're only applying it to their own emissions. So if you take an oil and gas company, for example, quite often when they talk about applying a $30 or $40 or even a $60 carbon price, they only apply that to their immediate emissions. They're not applying that to their products and what a $60 carbon price would do to demand for oil, gas or coal. And I think that's a very critical question. I think maybe now they will continue to do that. I think what's more exciting, again, from the financial sphere and the intervention of Mark Carney and organisations like Carbon Tracker, is the call for stress testing. So the call for companies, particularly the fossil fuel companies, but I think all companies, to stress test their business models against this 2 degrees scenario, or as Mark Carney called it, to stress test against a net zero outcome. What does that mean for your business then? How do you prepare? What are the risks? What are the opportunities?
Makes sense. All right. Well, thank you very much,
Thank
Anthony
you.
Hobley from Carbon Tracker, and we'll be back.